Imagine you're driving home late on a Friday night. The roads are quiet. You're not speeding. You haven't had a drink. You're just tired, maybe a little bored, and you've got that familiar itch to fill the silence. So when those red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror, your brain does what most brains do. It panics, and then it starts talking. You roll down the window, and before the officer even says a word, you're already explaining where you've been, where you're going, why you swerved half an inch over the line, and how you've never even had a parking ticket. You think you're being helpful, cooperative, transparent. But here's the unsettling truth: law enforcement has known for decades. Talking too much doesn't make you look innocent. It makes you look suspicious. Why would silence ever be the smarter move? Because everything you just said, that's not an explanation. That's evidence. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the most dangerous thing you can do during a traffic stop is keep your mouth open. Let's start with a psychological principle most drivers never consider. The average person believes that if they're innocent, they have nothing to hide. And if they have nothing to hide, they should just talk. Answer every question. Be polite. Be human. That logic feels right. But law enforcement training tells a completely different story. Officers are taught to detect deception not just through lies, but through what's called verbal overcompensation. Here's how it works. When a guilty person tries to appear innocent, they often provide too much detail, too many explanations, too many timelines. They over-narrate because they're trying to control your perception of them. But here's the twist. Innocent people do the exact same thing when they're nervous, and police know this. So from an officer's perspective, a driver who won't stop talking isn't necessarily guilty of a crime, but they are signaling something dangerous. They're signaling anxiety, fear, or the desperate need to convince. And in the world of traffic enforcement, that signal alone is probable cause to dig deeper. Almost nobody talks about this part, but there's a specific moment during a traffic stop where everything changes. It's the moment you shift from answering simple questions to volunteering information. Let me give you an example. An officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" A low-risk answer is "No, sir," or "I think I might have been going a little over back there." A high-risk answer is, "I know I was going 47 in a 35, but I just got off a 12-hour shift and my phone died and I'm trying to get home because my kid is sick and I wasn't paying attention to the speedometer because the radio was too loud and honestly I'm just really stressed right now." That second answer, that's not cooperation. That's a confession wrapped in a story. And here's the hard reality. Every extra word you speak creates a new potential contradiction. You said you were coming from work, but the officer notices you're wearing casual clothes. You said your phone died, but there's a charger visible in your cup holder. You said your kid is sick, but there are no signs of a child in the car. None of these things mean you're lying, but they don't have to. They just need to create reasonable suspicion. And once that exists, the stop can legally be extended. Your mouth just turned a 3-minute traffic violation into a 30-minute investigation. This changes everything about how you should think about police interactions, because most people operate under a fundamental misunderstanding. They believe the goal of a traffic stop is to prove your innocence. It's not. The goal is to avoid creating suspicion. And those are two completely different strategies. Proving innocence requires talking, explaining, offering alibis. Avoiding suspicion requires restraint, brevity, and emotional control. Think about it this way. A truly innocent person who knows their rights doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. They know the burden of proof is on the state. But a person who talks too much, they look like someone who's trying to get ahead of a story. And that behavior is statistically correlated with hidden contraband, outstanding warrants, and unlicensed driving. Officers aren't guessing here. They've run the numbers. Verbose drivers are searched more often. And here's the painful irony. They're also cited more often, even when the original violation was minor. Because once you've annoyed the officer with a 10-minute monologue about your terrible week, that warning you might have received, it's now a ticket. Human nature is real, and nobody likes being talked at. But let's go deeper, because the real danger isn't just looking suspicious. It's legally waiving your rights without realizing it. In both the United States and the United Kingdom, you have the right to remain silent. But here's what most drivers don't understand. That right isn't automatic. You have to invoke it. And if you keep talking, courts will assume you've waived it voluntarily. This has massive consequences. In the US, anything you say during a traffic stop can be used against you in court, even before you read your Miranda rights. Why? Because Miranda only applies during custodial interrogation, and a routine traffic stop is not legally considered custody until you're under arrest. That means for the first several minutes of the interaction, you have no constitutional protection against self-incrimination from casual conversation. You're essentially giving sworn testimony without a lawyer, without a warning, and without even realizing it. One wrong sentence can establish probable cause for a search. One inconsistent detail can become the foundation of a criminal charge, and you thought you were just being friendly. This is where the psychology gets even stranger. Research on deception detection shows that police officers are no better than random chance at spotting actual lies, but they are exceptionally good at spotting nervous behavior, and nervous behavior includes rambling, over-explaining, repeating yourself, and speaking faster than normal. In other words, the very things anxious, innocent people do are the exact behaviors officers are trained to interpret as deception cues. So you have a system where a guilty person who stays calm and says almost nothing might walk away with a warning, while an innocent person who talks too much gets their car searched. And then something unexpected happens. During the search, the officer finds nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no stolen goods. But the damage is already done. You've been detained for an extra 20 minutes. Your car has been taken apart. Your dignity is gone. And the officer simply says, "Have a nice day," and drives off. They face no consequences for being wrong, because they didn't need to be right. They only needed reasonable suspicion. And your own words gave them that. Let me give you a real-world example that haunts legal educators. In 2004, a driver in Texas was pulled for a minor equipment violation. The officer asked if he had anything illegal in the car. The driver said no. Then the officer asked if he could search the vehicle. The driver said he didn't consent. But because the driver kept nervously explaining why he didn't want the search, mentioning that he was in a hurry, that his mother was waiting, that he had nothing to hide but just didn't like being searched, the officer interpreted the rambling as suspicious. A drug dog was called. The dog alerted on absolutely nothing. But the officer searched anyway, found nothing, and the driver was released. That driver sued for unreasonable search, and the court ruled against him. Why? Because his own excessive talking during the initial stop had given the officer enough subjective suspicion to justify the dog sniff. His words didn't prove guilt, but they did prove something else. They proved he was nervous enough to investigate further. That's the trap. You don't have to be guilty to lose. You just have to look guilty. And then there's the UK, where the rules are different, but the psychology is identical. Under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, officers can stop and search a vehicle if they have reasonable grounds for suspicion. Those grounds can come from your behavior, including how much you talk and what you say. British courts have repeatedly upheld searches based largely on a driver's excessive verbosity, nervous chatter, or contradictory statements made without legal representation. One case from 2011 involved a driver pulled for a broken taillight. He talked for nearly 10 minutes about his entire evening, his job, his family, and why he would never carry drugs. The officer searched the car based on what he called unusual and excessive protestations of innocence. They found nothing, but here's the part that never makes the news. The driver was detained for over an hour. His car was impounded for a secondary search. He missed work. He had to pay to get his car back. And his crime? Being too chatty. That's not justice. That's a tax on nervousness. But the problem goes even deeper than wrongful searches, because talking too much doesn't just make you look suspicious to police. It makes you look suspicious to everyone watching. Dash cams, phone cameras, and bystanders are everywhere now. And if you're ever in a situation where a traffic stop escalates, the public record of that stop will include your voice, every nervous stammer, every unnecessary explanation, every time you said something that sounded evasive, even though you meant it to sound helpful. Prosecutors have used these recordings to paint drivers as dishonest, evasive, or guilty simply based on their tone and word choice. Juries are human, and humans interpret rambling as deception. You can be factually innocent of every charge and still lose a jury because you sounded like someone with something to hide. That's not how the legal system is supposed to work, but it's exactly how it does work. So what should you actually do? This is the part where most videos would give you a script. Say this, don't say that. But the reality is simpler and harder at the same time. You need to stop trying to manage the officer's perception of you, because you cannot. Everything you do to seem more innocent will be interpreted as a possible sign of guilt. The only winning move is to stop playing that game entirely. When you're pulled over, hand over your license, registration, and insurance. Answer basic identifying questions, your name, your address, whether you understand why you were stopped, and then you stop talking, politely, calmly, not defiantly. You don't need to announce that you're exercising your right to remain silent. You just need to actually remain silent. If the officer asks where you're coming from, you say, "I'd prefer not to answer that." If they ask if you know how fast you were going, you say, "I'd rather not discuss the details of the stop." If they ask for consent to search your vehicle, you say, "I do not consent to any searches," and then you stop talking again. No explanations, no justifications, no stories about your sick kid or your dead phone or your 12-hour shift, because every one of those stories is a rope they can pull. Here's where it gets strange. Officers actually respect this more than you think. Not because they like it, but because it signals something they understand. It signals that you know your rights. And drivers who know their rights are statistically less likely to be carrying something illegal. More importantly, they're harder to manipulate. And officers, like all humans, prefer easy targets. The driver who won't stop talking is easy. They'll give you everything you need without a warrant. The driver who stays silent is hard. They force you to do your job properly. And most of the time, for a minor traffic violation, that's not worth the effort. So they write the ticket or give the warning, and they move on. That's the outcome you want. Not because you're trying to hide something, because you're trying to protect yourself from yourself. Now let me ask you something. Think about the last time you were pulled over. Did you talk too much? Did you over-explain? Did you leave that stop feeling like you somehow made things worse even though you were trying to help? Most people have that exact experience, and they never understand why. It's because your survival instincts are wrong for this situation. Your brain says, be likable, be cooperative, be human. The legal reality says, be brief, be boring, be silent. Those two instincts are in direct conflict, and the people who win at traffic stops are the ones who override their own nature. They accept that the officer might think they're rude. They accept that silence feels unnatural. They accept that they'll never get to prove their innocence in that moment, because that's not what the moment is for. The moment is for getting through the interaction without creating new legal problems. Your day in court, if you need one, comes later. And when it comes, you want a lawyer speaking for you, not a recording of you rambling about your terrible week. We need to talk about one more layer, the social layer. Because here's something almost nobody considers. When you talk too much during a traffic stop, you're not just affecting yourself. You're affecting everyone who looks like you, sounds like you, or drives the same kind of car. Officers build mental models based on their experiences. If you're the fifth person that week who talked excessively and then got searched, that officer will start associating rambling with guilt. And the next driver who talks too much, regardless of their actual innocence, will face a higher chance of escalation. Your behavior trains law enforcement. That's not fair. But it's real. So when you keep your mouth shut, you're not just protecting yourself. You're resetting expectations. You're showing that nervous chatter is not a reliable indicator of anything. Over time, that changes how officers approach stops, but only if enough people actually do it. Let me leave you with this. The most powerful 3 words in any traffic stop are not, "I am innocent." They are, "I don't know." Because those 3 words stop the conversation. They create a natural pause. They signal that you're not going to fill the silence with speculation or over-explanation. Try this exercise. Next time you're driving, practice saying nothing for 30 seconds. Just sit in silence. Notice how uncomfortable it feels. Notice how your brain wants to talk, to explain, to justify your existence. That discomfort is exactly what officers are counting on. They know you'll crack. They know you'll fill the void with words, and they know those words will almost never help you. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Have you ever talked your way into a bigger problem during a traffic stop? And what did you learn from it? Because the more we share these stories, the less power this trap has. Silence isn't rude. Silence isn't suspicious. Silence is strategic. And the next time those lights flash behind you, remember, your mouth is not your lawyer. Your mouth is your witness. And the best witnesses know exactly when to stop talking.